Everyone in Maplewood thought they were living in one of the safest, quietest neighborhoods in the state, a place where people left their doors unlocked, borrowed sugar from their neighbors, and gathered under the community gazebo for summer. Potlucks and HOA meetings that felt more like tea parties than business. But that illusion shattered the day I got fined for something I had only talked about doing, painting my fence a darker color. Something I'd only mentioned in a phone call to my sister 2 nights earlier. At first, I thought it was just a creepy coincidence. Maybe someone overheard me through an open window. But the letter from the HOA wasn't vague, it specifically stated. Homeowner discussed plans to alter fence color to non-approved shade, which wasn't just a general assumption. It quoted me word for word. That's when I knew something was wrong. If you've ever felt like someone was watching you, like your own home wasn't really private, this story is for you, because what I uncovered in Maplewood will make you question just how far someone will go to stay in control. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe to Sham Stories so you never miss the truth behind the perfect neighborhood facade. It started small. Little things. Neighbors whispering about fines that didn't make sense. Getting written up for things no one could have possibly seen. Janet on Birchwood Lane was cited for having expired pantry items in her garage fridge. How? Would anyone know that unless they had been inside or listening? Doug, a quiet ex-cop who rarely said a word, got fined for telling his wife he planned to put up Halloween decorations a week early. He hadn't done it, he'd only said it. Then there was me, Jack Reed, just trying to repaint an old weathered fence. I'd said something over the phone, nothing more, and days later, I got a typed warning and a notice that I'd be brought up at the next HOA compliance hearing. I started asking questions, casually at first. I talked to neighbors during my evening walks. Most were polite, but uncomfortable. Some said they'd been fined too, but thought it was a mistake. Others said nothing, just gave a nervous laugh and changed the subject. The fear was subtle, but thick in the air. And at the center of it all, always smiling, always present, always watching, was Karen. Karen Crandall, HOA president for the past 7 years, wore pastel cardigans and a permanent half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd been re-elected every term without opposition. She was involved in everything from property inspections to community bake sales, and everyone knew better than to cross her. When she saw me talking to people, she started walking by my house more often, sometimes just once a day, sometimes 3 or 4 times, never saying a word, just pausing, clipboard in hand, pretending to check my hedges or driveway angle or the way my mailbox leaned. I'd worked in tech for over a decade, so when I started noticing strange signals near the HOA park, I paid attention. One afternoon while walking Max, my golden retriever, I noticed a small gray box mounted under the community bulletin board. It didn't look like much, just a rectangular panel labeled HOA Security Enhancement, property of Maplewood HOA. I assumed it was a motion light or maybe a weather monitor, until my Bluetooth scanner pinged it. It was emitting a signal, a broadcast signal. That night, I brought a stronger device and scanned again. Same ID, same frequency, a level audio broadcast. I checked 2 other security boxes the HOA had installed recently, one near the kids' playground and another under the gazebo where meetings were held. Same signal. My stomach dropped. I brought the data home, ran the packets through a basic analyzer. It was unencrypted analog audio, raw, open, meaning anyone with the right equipment could listen in, and I knew I couldn't confront Karen directly, not yet. I needed more proof. I remembered my neighbor Gracia, quiet widow with a sharp mind. She used to be a legal clerk before retiring, and she'd always had a soft spot for Max. I invited her over for coffee and gently asked if she'd ever felt like she was being watched. She froze. Then she said yes. She'd been fined last winter for discussing a possible home exchange program with her niece out of state. The conversation had only happened over a call. She never wrote it down, never told anyone else. When I told her what I'd found, to my surprise, she didn't call me paranoid. She just asked, "How much do you know so far?" That's how I learned she'd been keeping her own notes. She'd documented 12 instances over the last 18. Months where people were fined or reprimanded for things they had never made public. Most were small infractions, talking about putting up a shed, mentioning political signs, joking about hosting a big party, but every single one had been followed by a violation notice. We needed more evidence. That's when Grace introduced. Me too, Tyler, younger guy, in his 30s, who had done freelance electrician work during the HOA's security upgrades. He'd installed 2 of the boxes himself, and when I showed him the signals they emitted, his jaw clenched. They told me it was for safety. Karen said it was to help detect vandalism. I had no idea these things could record, he said. Together, the 3 of us formed an unlikely alliance. A tech guy, a retired legal clerk, and an electrician digging into the dirty underbelly of an HOA no one dared question. Over the next week, we quietly located and mapped every suspicious box and hidden mic we could find, under benches, inside lampposts, even one cleverly disguised inside a decorative birdhouse at the cul-de-sac entrance. We created a spreadsheet. We triangulated signal strength. We even caught snippets of live conversations being picked up from the devices. It was chilling. The final confirmation came when I picked up a direct audio stream from my own backyard where I had just talked to Max about possibly replacing the back fence gate. A day later, I got a notice. Unauthorized plans to alter backyard structure without HOA approval. That was the breaking point. We knew Karen was spying. We just didn't know how far she would go to protect her control or what she'd do if she found out we were on to her. The day after I received that violation for my private backyard conversation, I realized we had crossed an invisible line. Karen was no longer just playing HOA president. She was actively violating people's rights, invading privacy with the precision of a surveillance agency, and the question hanging over all of us now was simple but terrifying. Who else knew? If Karen had set up these devices alone, she would have needed access to power sources, installation equipment, and time, so was someone helping her? Or was she so embedded in the board that no one ever questioned how much control she had? Grace and Tyler both agreed we had to assume Karen was watching and listening to everything. That meant no more discussing plans over the phone, no whispering on sidewalks, no late-night texts. Everything had to be old-school face, handwritten notes or gestures during neighborhood walks. We called them silent walks. And it became our way of syncing without saying a word. Grace and I would take laps around the HOA pond, passing notes tucked into our jacket sleeves, while Tyler worked on secretly disabling a few of the surveillance boxes using timed voltage, cutoffs that mimicked power surges. Meanwhile, I was gathering data, scanning every audio packet, recording timestamps, logging when conversations occurred and when violations were issued. The pattern was undeniable. Karen's system was listening in real time and reacting within 24 to 72 hours. The moment she heard something she didn't like, boom. Violation letter. Warning. Notice. Fine. But there was something else that bothered me. Why would she go this far? Why risk lawsuits and jail time just to stay in control of an HOA board? Then Tyler brought me something that changed everything. It was a digital backup from one of the HOA's security server hubs. He'd worked on 6 months earlier, a small black box stored inside the HOA clubhouse utility room. He wasn't supposed to copy anything, but he'd cloned a mirror image of the system for testing purposes. Inside it were audio logs, hundreds of them stored as labeled files. Lot 18 fence talk. Lot 9 political signs. Lot 22 rental discussion. They were tagged with dates, addresses, and keywords. Oh, it wasn't just live listening. Karen was archiving private conversations, indexing them like some kind of neighborhood intelligence agency. The deeper we went, the more horrifying it got. Grace found her own voice recorded discussing her late husband's pension fund. Tyler found a clip of himself complaining about his HOA contract rates while speaking to his brother on speakerphone. There were conversations from children, family, arguments, private medical discussions, all cataloged. Karen had been building a database of leverage, of secrets, using her position to manipulate the neighborhood like a silent dictator. And it had worked. Because somewhere deep down they sensed something was off. Now we knew what it was. That week, Grace suggested we start testing Karen's system with false information. If we feed her a fake story, she said, and she acts on it, we'll have real-time proof of the surveillance loop. So we set the bait. I drafted a handwritten note to self and left it on my kitchen counter. Something easily visible through the front window where I now suspected she had line of sight with a long-range mic. The note read, "Call contractor converting garage into guest rental." That was a major HOA violation. Never made the call. Never even said it out loud. Within 48 hours, a warning notice appeared. Unauthorized discussion of illegal short-term rental plans detected. That was it. It was irrefutable. Karen was spying not just through audio devices, but possibly using visual aids or telescopic mics. I reported this directly to the county sheriff's office. I expected skepticism, but to my surprise, the deputy didn't laugh. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You're the third person this year to complain about Maplewoods HOA. Leadership." I asked what had happened to the others. He said one stopped responding, and the other sold their house and moved. But he gave me a name, Detective Larson, someone who specialized in digital surveillance crimes. That same day, Grace got a letter from the HOA saying her backyard fence was in violation due to a privacy barrier obstructing community aesthetics. Her fence hadn't changed in 12 years. It was retaliation, pure and simple. Karen was striking back, trying to scare her into silence. Tyler noticed the box he'd disabled under the playground was suddenly replaced. This woman had backups, redundancies. She was playing chess while the rest of us were still figuring out the board. That night, I met with Detective Larson in private. I showed him the recordings, the signals, the archive files, the dates matching the violations. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through the logs. "This isn't just HOA abuse," he said. "This is felony-level surveillance and digital wiretapping. If even a fraction of this is true, she could face serious prison time." But he also warned me to be careful. "People like this don't go down quietly. She's probably paranoid and monitoring you right now." He was right. The next morning, my porch light bulb had been smashed, my tires were suspiciously low on air, and a small sticky note was taped to my mailbox that read, "Careful who you trust." No name, no signature, just fear. Grace's phone began dropping calls. Tyler reported seeing Karen sitting in her car across from his house late at night. We realized we were being hunted in our own neighborhood. That's when I decided to flip the script. If Karen wanted to play mind games, we would set a trap. Grace crafted a fake HOA leak letter, suggesting that 2 board members were considering voting her out at the next election. We made sure it was placed inside the community center mailbox on a Sunday night, knowing the only person who would retrieve it early would be Karen herself. Then we waited. By Wednesday, both board members had received anonymous letters accusing them of corruption. One of them, Mr. Hernandez, confronted Karen directly on by Friday. He'd resigned from the board for personal reasons. Grace smirked when she heard hook, line, and meltdown. We were watching Karen unravel, but that wasn't enough. We needed her ganond. We needed the entire community to see exactly who she was. Tyler used his electrician credentials to access the clubhouse again under the guise of replacing a defective panel. Instead, he installed a hidden camera pointing directly at Karen's desk, synced to a private drive we controlled. Over the next 2 days, we captured her plugging in USB drives, deleting specific files, and talking on the phone about neutralizing rumors and getting ahead of the noise. She was aware someone was closing in and she was trying to cover her tracks. That's when we got lucky. One night, Karen forgot to unplug a microphone transmitter after a meeting. For over 2 hours, we captured her pacing the empty HOA room, ranting out loud, talking to herself about which residents she had dirt on, including names, threats, and plans. She didn't know she'd left the system on. That file alone would be enough to destroy her. But we weren't ready to strike just yet. We needed one last thing: witnesses. We needed the neighbors who had been afraid for so long to see and hear for themselves the truth, not just rumors, not just stories. But Karen, in her own words, confessing to every paranoid suspicion we had ever imagined. The audio recording of Karen talking to herself in that empty meeting room was the smoking gun we never expected to catch so clearly. Her voice, filled with smug satisfaction and occasional sharp panic, detailed how she had installed non-invasive community sensors, how she had files on every one of them. Grace, that nosy widow. Jack, the fence boy. Even that idiot Tyler, and how she wasn't about to lose control now after all these years. She rambled about keeping the community safe from the lazy ones, how she knew their secrets, and how she could bury them in fines if they didn't fall in line. She even mentioned tactics placing bugs in benches inside hollow bird houses and HOA signage posts. And she bragged about getting access to private Wi-Fi networks using borrowed credentials. There was no excuse, no way to twist it. This was a confession, not whispered under pressure, not made by mistake, but uttered freely, as if she truly believed no one could ever touch her. Grace, Tyler, and I sat in silence in my living room, listening to the playback over my laptop as the room grew darker and more tense with every passing minute. When the file ended, Grace looked at me and said, "It's time." But getting the neighborhood to believe us was the next battle. Karen had ruled this place like a monarch for years. People feared her, obeyed her, and some even admired her, thinking she was just strict but effective. We needed a way to expose her in public, in a way that couldn't be denied or buried under more HOA paperwork. Grace suggested an emergency community meeting, a legal right that could be triggered by gathering enough resident signatures. We needed 20 households to request it. That seemed impossible, until Grace, brave as ever, knocked on door after door with a short, simple statement. "Karen's been recording us. We have proof. You deserve to hear it." Some slammed the door, some shook their heads in disbelief, but others, those who had also felt the creeping unease, the inexplicable fines, the whispers of secrets only they should have known those neighbors signed, wanted 3 signatures by the 3rd day. We turned the request in through proper HOA channels, knowing Karen would see it. Her response was swift. The next morning, a letter was taped to every resident's door. An emergency Karen-organized HOA meeting would be held 3 days later, claiming it was to discuss rising tensions, false accusations, and protect the integrity of the Maplewood HOA. She was trying to take control of the narrative before we could speak. It didn't matter. We let her plan her own stage. The clubhouse filled quickly that Thursday evening. People who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up, whispering and glancing around. Karen stood confidently at the front, perfectly manicured, pearls tight around her neck, wearing a lavender blouse that gave her the air of suburban royalty. "Good evening, neighbors," she said calmly. "I know there have been a lot of rumors lately about privacy, spying, ridiculous accusations. I want to address those head-on and assure you that our HOA has always operated within the bounds of the law and with the safety of our community in mind." She went on for 10 minutes, painting herself as the victim of a witch hunt, blaming a few disgruntled individuals with too much time on their hands for creating hysteria. She smiled the whole way through, and she opened the floor for questions. It's when I stood up and said, "Karen, I'd like to play something for the community." Her smile faltered. "This isn't the time for baseless theatrics, Jack," she said. "Sit down." "It's not theatrics," I replied. "It's your voice, talking about how you've been spying on us. I think everyone deserves to hear it." She tried to interrupt again, but Tyler, already in position, hit play on the portable speaker connected to the recording. The room fell into stunned silence. Karen's voice echoed through the clubhouse, bragging, ranting, confessing. Names were mentioned. Tactics described. Laughter from her when she recounted how she shut Grace up with a bogus fence notice and knew Jack was stupid enough to talk near a window. There was no escape. The people who doubted us, the ones still holding on to their illusions of HOA, heard her in her own words. Some gasped, some turned pale. Others looked furious. Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting, trying to find a way to reclaim the room, but it was gone. The meeting erupted. People shouted questions, demands. One man stormed out, saying, "I've got 3 kids, and this psycho was recording them?" Others rallied around us, asking what came next. Karen tried to leave, but Grace blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "The sheriff's department has been notified. They're on their way." And they were. Detective Larson and a deputy arrived minutes later, stepped in calmly, and walked straight to Karen. "Ms. Crandall," he said, "we need you to come with us for questioning regarding illegal surveillance, privacy violations, and possible tampering with community property." She tried to argue, tried to explain, but he cut her off. "We've reviewed the evidence. You've been operating an unauthorized surveillance network, including audio recording devices and digital files on residents without consent." The deputy placed cuffs on her wrists. The crowd, watching, erupted in disbelief and satisfaction. Karen Crandall, the woman who had fined people for crooked trash can placement, who had shamed a teenager for having lead strip lights in their bedroom window, who had dictated every lawn's blade length, was walked out of the Maplewood clubhouse in handcuffs, flanked by law enforcement. As she was escorted past me, she hissed, "You think this is over?" I didn't reply. She wasn't worth the breath. After they left, the crowd didn't leave. People stayed, talked, shared stories. We started passing around a sign-up sheet for an interim HOA leadership committee, neighbors choosing neighbors. The spell Karen had over the neighborhood had finally broken. But the real work had just begun. Because even though she was gone, her influence was still buried in HOA bylaws, in unapproved surveillance equipment still mounted on neighborhood posts, and in the fear that had kept people quiet for years. That night, we didn't sleep. Grace. Tyler and I stayed up going over what we still needed to remove, who we needed to protect, and how we would begin rebuilding trust. We'd taken the queen off the board, but the game wasn't over yet. After Karen was taken into custody, the neighborhood didn't immediately burst into celebration like I thought it would. Sure, there were handshakes, whispers of relief, and even a couple of wine corks popping that night. But it was like the whole community had come out of a long, slow storm, and they were only just beginning to understand how soaked they truly were. People were confused, disoriented, unsure what was safe to say or do now that the tyrant was gone. It wasn't just fear that lingered. It was her fingerprints on every part of the HOA, on policies, committees, surveillance devices, even files, hidden in HOA digital storage units that still hadn't been cracked open. Karen had ruled with paranoia and precision. We'd exposed her, yes, but we hadn't fully dismantled the system she created. The first 48 hours after her arrest were chaos. Tyler and I walked through the neighborhood like technicians unraveling a digital crime scene. We mapped every single surveillance device, 32 in total, not counting decoys. We unscrewed fake motion detectors, pulled down silent microphone poles, and cracked open more of those community security boxes that were really black market listening hubs disguised as HOA property. Some of them weren't even listed in the HOA's installation budget, which meant Karen had funded parts of this herself or diverted HOA funds under the radar. That opened a whole new legal angle, and Detective Larson was eager to dig. Grace, meanwhile, stepped into a natural leadership role. At 73, she walked from house to house with a clipboard, gathering support for the emergency formation of a new interim HOA board. People signed fast, maybe out of guilt for staying quiet so long, or maybe because for the first time in years they were being asked their opinion instead of told what to do. The biggest problem was the digital records. Karen had built a fortress of files, hundreds of folders with resident names, tagged complaints, even spreadsheets that seemed to track who was a friend, a threat, or unpredictable. Many of the documents were encrypted. I spent long hours at home trying to break into them, using everything short of brute force. It was Grace who found the back door. Karen, ever the narcissist, had created a personal file folder labeled Reflections. Inside were private notes she had written to herself, complete with quotes, photos, and even HOA gossip, annotated like a high school diary. One entry read, "Doug tried to argue about sign colors again. Remind him about his incident with that bar waitress if he keeps pushing." Another said, "Grace is watching me. Fence excuse worked, but keep eyes on her yard." It was eerie to read a journal of manipulation, secrets, and threats masquerading as HOA policy. But it also contained password fragments. Notes like "fence for 5 rows" or "lot 18_July" gave us clues to decrypt deeper folders.
Ow!
When we finally cracked the central data vault, we found audio logs going back almost for years. Thousands of hours of private conversations stored, backed up, indexed by house number, and labeled with keywords. One folder contained a chilling tag: leverage. That's when we realized she'd been doing more than spying. She had been controlling people. There were recordings of board members cheating on spouses, teens venting about school or drinking, seniors discussing wills and inheritances. All of it stored with timestamps and flagged quotes. We shared the worst of it with Larson, who immediately began building the case for felony surveillance, blackmail, and unauthorized data collection. That was when the press caught wind. A local news team showed up at the Maplewood gates. Someone had tipped them off anonymously, probably one of the residents who still wanted the neighborhood to heal in silence. They interviewed a few people anonymously, then asked Grace and me to comment on record. We agreed. It was time the truth came out in the open. The next morning, the news broke. HOA president accused of spying on residents for years. Headlines spread quickly. Social media picked it up. We were suddenly the epicenter of a suburban surveillance scandal. And with it came a new problem fear of lawsuits. Neighbors, who had been recorded talking about personal finances or medical conditions, began calling lawyers. The HOA, though leaderless for now, was still legally responsible. That meant we had to act fast. We held our first community-wide vote to formally remove Karen's influence, revoking all policies she'd enacted single-handedly over the past 5 years. Tyler drafted the new motion language, while I managed the voting software to ensure accuracy and transparency. Grace rallied the neighborhood once again, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and organizing evening gatherings where people could ask questions and feel safe. On voting day, 87% of homeowners participated. One of Karen's standalone directives was repealed. Her pet projects, surveillance contracts, ridiculous fence rules, noise curfews were all struck down. But her system had left a deep scar, one that wouldn't heal with a few policies and a couple of new board members. That's when Grace came up with a bold idea. A community forum, not just a meeting, but a place where everyone could come together to tell their stories, ask questions, and reclaim what had been taken from them. The idea was simple, but powerful. We booked the community center for a Saturday afternoon and called it Maplewood Unmuted. We expected a few dozen people to show. Nearly 100 came. One by one, they stood and shared their truths. Janet, who had stopped talking on her porch out of fear. Doug, who had hidden his political beliefs for years. Teenager who said he never invited friends over because he thought someone was always listening. Even a couple who admitted they almost divorced after Karen twisted their words from a recorded argument. It was emotional, raw, and for the first time in a long time, healing. Karen had used silence as her weapon. We were using truth to fight back. At the end of the event, Tyler unveiled something symbolic: a tall steel trash can marked Karen's files. One by one, people came forward and dropped in printed copies of their old violation letters, warning notices, and HOA fines. Some even dropped in fake microphones and wires we had collected. Then Grace set the whole thing ablaze under a fire-safe cover as neighbors clapped. It was symbolic, sure, but it meant something. We were burning more than paper. We were burning her legacy. Yet even as the flames died down, we knew we weren't done. Karen's trial was approaching. The state was preparing charges for illegal surveillance, unlawful wiretapping, abuse of power, and tampering with digital infrastructure. And the DA had asked for testimony. It meant stepping into court, facing Karen again, and helping ensure she didn't just walk away with a fine and a slap on the wrist. Grace immediately agreed. Tyler was nervous, but he said yes too. I hesitated. I didn't fear her anymore, but I did fear what she might say in that courtroom. People like Karen didn't go down without dragging others through the mud. Spent months preparing, gathering evidence, building alliances, but testifying would mean standing in front of cameras, attorneys, and strangers, while the woman who had terrorized this neighborhood tried to spin the truth in her favor. Also knew what was at stake. If we didn't finish this, She'd come back in some form. Maybe not here. Maybe not with an HOA badge, but somewhere else, with a new clipboard, a new community to poison. I looked at Grace and Tyler and said, I'm in. We'd taken the surveillance down. We'd reclaimed our streets and porches and parks. Now it was time to reclaim justice, too. The courtroom was cold, not just in temperature, but in tone. With the sterile white lights above and the judge's sharp gavel strike cutting through the air like a blade, Karen Crandall sat at the defense table, dressed in gray knot, the pastel cardigans she once wore while patrolling the Maplewood sidewalks, but a stiff blazer, her blonde bob pulled tighter than ever, her lips pressed into a bitter line. It had been 6 weeks since her arrest, and in that time, the prosecution had built a mountain of evidence from the digital files. Audio logs, resident testimonies, and recovered devices. Still, she pled not guilty to every count: unlawful surveillance, illegal wiretapping, harassment, intimidation, tampering with HOA infrastructure, and data misuse. Her lawyer painted a picture of a concerned and misunderstood community volunteer, someone whose actions, though overzealous, were never malicious. But then the prosecution began rolling the recordings. First, the ones we captured from the clubhouse mic, her monologue of control and manipulation. Then the files she'd stored, blackmail conversations, surveillance notes, even a spreadsheet labeled behavioral profiles of neighbors with threat scores. The court grew quiet. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly blindsided by the amount of evidence we'd brought forward. Then came the testimonies. Grace went first, her voice calm and steady as she described the finds, the sudden notices, and how Karen had weaponized fear. She even quoted the exact entries Karen had written about her in that private reflections folder. Tyler followed, explaining the installation of the devices, how Karen had misled him during the job, how she replaced equipment secretly, and how he'd later discovered she had access to resident Wi-Fi signals. I was last. My hands were sweating. I didn't have Grace's poise or Tyler's quiet confidence, but I told them the truth. About the note in my kitchen that Karen somehow read, about the fake garage rentals she responded to within 48 hours, about the hidden boxes emitting analog audio, the pattern of violations tied to private conversations, and the night she left the recorder on, unknowingly confessing her tactics. I ended with a line that seemed to hit the room like thunder. Karen didn't just break the law, she broke the trust that holds a community together. The judge nodded, visibly disturbed by the recordings. Karen, for her part, remained stone-faced until the verdict was read. Guilty. On all counts. Her sentence was handed down 2 weeks later. 3 years in prison, personal fine of $250,000, and a permanent ban from holding any HOA, community or civic leadership position. In the state, when the news reached Maplewood, neighbors didn't celebrate with parties or cheers, they just breathed. For the first time in years, they relaxed. The air felt lighter. Porch conversations returned. Kids rode bikes again without glances over their shoulders. The HOA was rebuilt with an open committee, full transparency, and rotating leadership. Grace became interim board chair, but insisted on stepping down after 6 months to ensure no one got too comfortable in power. Tyler helped replace the old surveillance equipment with real security, cameras transparent, visible, and governed by strict rules the neighborhood voted on. As for me, I found peace again. I could talk on my porch, laugh over the phone, leave notes on my fridge without wondering who might read them. But I also learned a lesson I'd never forget. Evil doesn't always wear a mask or hide in the dark. Sometimes it walks your street every day with a clipboard and a smile. A few weeks after the sentencing, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no name, just a single photo inside. It was taken from a high angle, clearly a surveillance cam. The image showed me Grace and Tyler sitting at my dining table during one of our early strategy sessions. It wasn't dated, wasn't signed, but on the back someone had scrawled a message in red ink. There's always another one watching. I took it straight to Detective Larson, who said they'd investigate, but his face told me he wasn't hopeful. Karen might have acted alone, but her tools, her tactics, her mindset, those things weren't unique. They were just part of a deeper sickness that feeds on silence and compliance. We'd cut off the head, but who knew how many seeds had been planted? Still, Maplewood had changed. We weren't quiet anymore. We weren't afraid. We had learned how to speak up, how to fight back, and how to rebuild from within. And if someone tried to rise up again with secret files and hidden mics, they'd face a neighborhood that now knew exactly what to look for and what to do. Because once the spell is broken, once people have seen what power really does, when it goes unchecked, they don't go back to sleep. They stay awake, and they watch the watchers. If you've ever dealt with a power-drunk HOA president, a spying neighbor, or someone who tried to rule your life through fear, then this story was for you. And if you want more true stories of justice, revenge, and neighborhood drama just like this one, subscribe to Sham Stories right now and turn on that bell icon, because you never know when the next HOA Karen might rise again.